Yes, yes, yes. Welcome to another episode of Hip Hope Hooray, Black Men Talking Health. I am your MC for this evening. I am Oya Gilbert, and we got a really dope episode for you today. In the building, I have some of IMF's, which is the International Myeloma Foundation's top dogs. I mean, like top dogs. And we are going to be discussing today clinical trials, specifically in the Black and brown community, and a lot of the stigmas and stereotypes. And these cats are going to debunk some of those things and give you some real information. And so to my right is Dr. Joseph Mikhael. I call him Dr. J. You can check his bio, Google him, and all that good stuff. It's too long. And on my left is Yelak Biru. He is the president and CEO of the International Myeloma Foundation. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much to be with you.
So look, we're gonna dive right straight into it because this is how we do it on my listeners. So I'm gonna ask y'all the first question, and either one of you can take it. So typically, in the Black community, you have Tuskegee and all those different things that have affected the mindsets of the Black and brown community. And a number of other things of mistrust in the healthcare system. But specifically, we're talking about clinical trials. So what historical factors have contributed to the reluctance of Black and brown communities to participate in clinical trials? And how can we work to overcome those things?
Well, I think first, trying to define part of the problem, right? And you've already outlined some of it, that first of all, this goes back a long way.
Right.
Which is part of the challenge why we can't fix it overnight, although I'm very excited about ways in which, as we're going to talk, I'm sure in a few minutes, how we can address that. But historically, it's really been the product of multiple things. I would summarize it quickly by saying, one, there has been a lot of sadly true, but there has been a lot of misconduct in clinical trials. You mentioned Tuskegee by name, and we could mention several others where, in particular, disadvantaged populations, very often the Black and brown communities, and often others as well, were not treated the way we now would treat people as we conduct clinical research. So these individuals were not given the right therapy, or not followed up correctly, or were actually, worse than that, given bad therapies and not given ways to overcome the side effects from it, or were not appropriately followed up. And so that built a really sad history, obviously, of the way research was conducted. Add to that, we know that health in general is such an important part of our life, and the healthcare system, the way it was built, the way it was designed, and the way it's been implemented, very often disadvantages those that are socioeconomically less involved, that has historically affected Black and brown communities. And so those social determinants of health have been massive in the area where people live, their access to groceries or food in general, the childcare, opportunities for employment, the safety of their water, the safety of crime. All of those things have had a compounding effect to that history of misconduct within clinical trials. And then very often the lack of recognition of these things in the general community. This sort of dispensing with, this almost view of lesser societies. It's tragic in our history, which I think, thankfully, over the last several years is starting to turn the corner. So that's been historically where we've been, but I know that Yelak speaks very well to how modern day still has significant elements of these challenges. And Yelak, I'm always interested in hearing from your side.
Absolutely, Dr. Joe. Oh yeah, again, thanks for having us.
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out how you just took over my show. I'm going to go. Yelak, go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
In addition to being and serving as president and CEO, I'm also a multiple myeloma patient. And I have been a patient for the last 28 years. And I have participated in clinical trials. And it is important to know that clinical trials are a prerequisite for a new drug to be approved in the US by the US Food and Drug Administration. While I respect and understand the historical implications of what happened, and we really need to respect that, we really need to also understand where we are and really truly be energized by the future. So where we are today is that because of not just the history, but the differences in socioeconomic situation of not just blacks, but also the environment in which they live, they don't have access to clinical trials. That is number one. Number two is because of the preconceived idea that blacks know about the history of abuse in the clinical trial system, they don't get asked to participate in the clinical trials. So that creates the situation today, not just the disadvantages blacks had in the past.
So, I would completely agree with you. As a lot of people know my story, I'm also a multiple myeloma patient. And one of the things, Yelak, that you said before in a previous interview is about passing the baton. And so one of the things I would like to stress as far as to the Black and brown community is that even though these stereotypes and stigmas still exist to this day, you have to remember that I remember that somebody before me, a Black and brown person, decided to do a clinical trial, decided to, and obviously back then, that stigma and stereotype was even more profound. But they decided to do it, and which has me alive and you alive. And so I think that's a very important piece to make sure that we point out to the listeners. So one of the other things is how can healthcare professionals, because that's another component to it. How can healthcare professionals and researchers build trust with Black and brown communities to encourage greater participation in clinical trials?
Well, there's a lot of ways to answer that. It starts with, how do you build trust anywhere with anything, right? Yeah. You've got to be genuine and you got to take time, right? I can't build trust with you. You and I met, we were brothers, instantly, but trust typically takes time, right? And so what I try to instruct my colleagues in this is, it's not just about you come to me when you're sick and I'll provide something. It's that kind of community engagement, that investment of time and energy and of genuine compassion in the community, that you care. If someone has developed that kind of relationship with their healthcare practitioner, we know, especially in oncology, it improves their outcomes.
Right.
So your relationship with your doctor is not just a warm, touchy-feely, hold hands, sing kumbaya kind of moment. Right. This actually affects your outcome. And so for us, we have a lot of work to do. Our standards now, thankfully, are very high. So in light of the terrible misconduct of the past, we have regulations and rules and so on, but it's on us to build that trust. I also think it's on us to provide the right kind of education. You say the word clinical trial. If I walked out in the street today and asked people at the microphone about clinical trial, you're going to get 100 different answers.
Yeah.
And you said it correctly, that the people who've gone on before have given you benefit, but it's also really important to know that the vast majority of our patients who we would put on clinical trial is for their benefit.
Right.
It's not just for, it's not like I'm donating my body to science. Right. No. You are getting a chance to get a drug earlier, to get a new therapy, to give I have seen hundreds of lives of patients over my career that have been extended because of the clinical trial they were on, not just because we stand on the shoulders of giants, as we often say, which is true, but their own benefit. So really, I think it's a combination of the right education and that compassion and time that we need to put in for us to start to rebuild that trust, recognizing it's gonna take time. I have to be conscious of the fact that that person doesn't trust. And I don't want to do what Yelak said and just pretend, that person is from a historically disadvantaged group. I won't even talk to them about trials. Sadly, we've seen that. So it's on us too to start saying, no, I should be thinking about a clinical trial in all of my patients, independent of their background.
So before I let you chime in and elaborate on that, one of the things is that that's different back in the past. So, hospitals and things of that nature, healthcare professionals, unfortunately, they got KPIs just like any other place, because I've seen that happen. And so, they can only see a patient for 15, 20 minutes and it's on to the next thing. And, it's unfortunate, and I think that's a sad practice that we have, because especially when you're talking about cancer, people's lives are on the line. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, when I think about my age in that era, you typically had the same doctor from almost like childhood all the way to as a grown person, and that's what's so different now. And I just want to point that out. That's another aspect that I think that creates a disparity in the issue along with that. Could you elaborate with that?
Sure. You guys both brought really good points. What I will add is today, for a clinical trial to be designed and initiated and for patients to participate, there are a lot of regulatory guardrails that exist that prevent from the injustice that happened in the past from happening again. So I think Blacks and all of us really need to understand that there are those guardrails. The second one is clinical trials are designed by humans. There are doctors, pharmaceutical companies, clinicians that design these clinical trials. Patients should and can be invited to help design those clinical trials. And if patients that look like you and me are part of the design process, the trial is going to be designed and, in my opinion, have better trust from those that we are going to invite to be able to participate in those clinical trials.
You hit a really dope point, because my slogan is we should be involved from conception to commercialization when it comes to that. And another thing about clinical trials that I don't think a lot of people know is that you are having some of the best medical professionals treating you when you're doing a clinical trial. It's not like the normal doctor that you might see in an area that might not have the specialty in it. But when you're on a clinical trial, you have high-level specialty folks, from the nurses to the specialists as well. I'm gonna jump into number 3, and this is a good one. So what steps? Obviously, we can talk about all the problems, but what steps can be taken to ensure that clinical trials are conducted ethnically and with the best interests of their communities in mind?
Well, I think part of it is what Yelak shared with us, is that there are some guardrails and standards that are extremely high that have been put in, and unfortunately had to be put in because of the misconduct of the past. But it's not just the rules and regulations. It is now, I think of it, we're taking it a further step, where the rules and regulations show you, the sort of the minimum standard and that careful guardrail. But as we've already been intimating, I think it requires more than that. It requires the engagement of all parties involved to appreciate the importance and value of diversity in clinical trials, and how they're conducted. So what does that look like? That means bringing together the FDA, the pharmaceutical companies, the medical community, the lay community, and the patient community. And everyone has a role together. So engaging, like you indicated, Oya, that it's so important that we have patient engagement from the very start, but also in the understanding of what's happening here. So what is preventing, what are those barriers that we've talked about, the historical trust and so on, but sometimes it's very, very pragmatic. Why do we keep doing clinical trials just in certain states? Up to 80% of African American patients live in 18 states in this country, and often those are the states not represented in a lot of these clinical trials. Alabama, Louisiana, other places like that. So sometimes it's sheer geography, but it's also recognizing, like you said, the patient engagement and the materials that are given to patients. Why do we always have a picture of a white person on the there's got to be, so people and the teams that we have, right, that we reflect that diversity. When someone comes in, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone on the team has to be of a diverse background, but when someone comes in and do a clinic and they see at least someone who looks a little bit like themselves, there's a comfort that comes with that. It's a recognition that we're all in this together. So I think there are multiple ways of doing so, in the partnership with everybody, in the engagement of each one of those stakeholders. And then of us as doctors, I participated recently in the DRIVE initiative. This is Dr. Remo Barahay from Indianapolis, who is really passionate about this issue and has come up with, I won't go through it in detail, but sort of a 5-step process to foster and ensure that we have appropriate diversity in clinical trials. Like in myeloma, 20% of people in this country with myeloma are African American, and most clinical trials have 3 to 5% representation.
And that's
Like,
crazy.
not cool. That's crazy, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so one of the things that he indicates, for example, is the patient engagement that we've discussed, but also having a diversity officer for all these trials who oversees it, not as someone who's trying to prevent the trial, but to support and say, how are we doing in this trial? What are we doing to reach out to this community? How are we trying to find ways to ensure? And we've done this in some of our trials recently in myeloma. One of the largest trials we've just done here in the United States, the determination trial, had 19% representation of African Americans.
Oh wow,
and that's because there was a
astounding.
conscious effort to say, let's bring this trial to different communities. Let's have a plan and a strategy to ensure that we make this happen. So that's a tip of the iceberg. I mean, I could bore you all day long with answers to that, but to me, that's very important, because where there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
And that will has to have a way to be fulfilled. And I think we're starting to see that, and we can even do more. And that's why I think the IMF has to be a big part of this, because the IMF is one of the very few organizations that can actually bring all those groups together in a meaningful way. It's hard for the pharmaceutical company to host this. It's hard for the FDA to host this. It's hard for patients themselves, if you will, to host this, or the lay community. But we want to be the convener to facilitate and make that happen.
Yeah, that's dope. You want to elaborate, Yelak?
I agree with everything. What I would say is also, it is not versus or end. It is end. It's not blacks versus whites.
Right.
It is not patients versus the doctor, or the doctor and the patients against the pharmaceutical companies. We have to all understand the benefit of elevating participation in clinical trial in general, and ensure that we all benefit from that. That's one. The second point is which Dr. Joe indicated last, which is others, as you mentioned, may have KPIs. The number of people they see, then where they have to initiate a clinical trial. But a non-profit organization like the IMF, which is a very patient-centered organization, we advocate for, we educate on behalf of the patients.
Right. You're not governed by those rules.
Exactly. We do have our own KPIs, but the patient is, in my opinion, the KPI.
The number one, right.
And we need to make sure that we have a seat and we are seen as a convener of these various entities, and ensure that we are elevating participation in all.
Man, I couldn't agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, one of the things is to both of what you said is, first and foremost, you got to get educated. You know, I feel like in order to not let things of the past happen, you need to know what's going on. So you need to be educated. We can also have a seat at the table, but if you have to have a seat at the table, you're not educated, not know what's going on, then there's really no business for you being there. But one of the things I always try to keep it real is that in our community, especially black men, I mean, I don't want to, I can't have this conversation with you without saying that, some of this stuff is self-inflicted. You know, I have friends that just won't even go to the doctors, let alone talk about a test. And, I asked them why, and one of them said, hey, I don't want to know. And that's not like an anomaly as a response. So I really want to make sure it's clear to the listeners is that, we have to sometimes get out of our own way, especially understanding that it is 2024, not 1924. And so it's important for me to express that us, especially as black men, we got to go to the doctor, stop using the ER as our PCP, and do things in the right way and kind of get out of that old stinking thinking.
Yeah, can I comment on that for a second? I totally agree with you, right? And lots of different ways. I mean, we did a program in Indiana in barbershops, right? To reach out to men. And one of the gentlemen who had founded that organization explained to me that one of his black friends said to him, my wife goes to the doctor all the time, and she and I live in the same house and eat the same food. So if she's good, I must be good too. And he wasn't saying it. I mean, it is, you naturally laugh at it, but he was serious. Yeah. And so one of the ways I think to help break that barrier down a little bit is to meet people where they're at, and have them endeared to medical information that may not just be in the doctor's office. So that's why we do programs in barbershops, in churches, in fraternities, in sororities, in different places where we can say, and this is what the IMF is doing through our Empower program, M stands for Myeloma Power, where we're trying to reach people where they're at to explain the basics of health. In particular, obviously, we're interested in having them understand what may happen in myeloma because it so adversely affects the African American community. And then maybe lastly, if I can add this one thing specific to clinical trials, I hope I'm a pretty good communicator, and Dr. Joe loves to share things with people, but it's a lot different when it comes. It's difficult to
really understand what you're saying right now.
But when it comes from patient to patient, like you doing exactly what you're doing right now. We've created a program called the Clinical Trial Mentorship Program, where we are asking patients from historically underrepresented communities, African American community, Latino American community, Native American community, who have been on a clinical trial to share their story. Sometimes the story's good, sometimes the story's challenging, but so that when someone hears it peer to peer, so as we're developing this program now, we're going to be able to use, whether it's through social media, our in-person meetings, our community engagement, which is such an important part of health. I really believe in that notion of going out to the community, not just waiting for them to get sick and come to us.
Right.
I think this program is going to help us with that. So when we did a program in Detroit, and there was an individual there who is sharing his experience of being in clinical trial. I'll tell you, everybody in the room was listening.
Right.
It's one thing for Dr. Joe to say it, it's another thing for patient Oya to say it.
Right.
And we think that's going to be a big part of what's coming in the future, because that will even engender that trust that much more when people hear it from someone within their community. Even, working with you, working with Ice-T as we have been, and others who want to be spokespeople so that people hear from within their own community the benefits of clinical trials.
Man, I agree with you. It's like, it's just a different way to deliver the message. And one of the things you both were saying is we got to be in the trenches. We got to get, grassroots, the trenches, the block. That's where we need to be to meet people where they at, so we can understand what truly is their mistrust issues and be able to build that trust. So I'm gonna go to my last question. So, how can we increase awareness and education? I know you have touched on a lot of it already within the Black and Brown communities about the importance of clinical trials and the potential benefits of participating in medical research.
The number one information I think your listeners should take is what I said initially. In order for you and I to have the next best treatment, someone has to go through a clinical trial, right? So clinical trials are a precursor for a drug being available. Number two is that we have to understand the history and the stories that have happened over the last 100 years, if you would. But we also really need to ensure that we are not going to repeat that story as we move forward and into the future. So for us, as patients, as a doctor, as clinicians somewhere else, and whoever your listeners may be, really need to ensure that we make commitment on behalf of our future self in order to make sure that we are going to participate in the clinical trial so we can help bring the drugs that are important for patients. But it's also important what Dr. Joe said, that clinical trials is not about just paying it forward. It really is us benefiting from the drugs of the future today. We are not going to be experimented. We are not going to be guinea pigs. We are not necessarily always be able to get a placebo. We are going to get what's called the standard of care, whatever that standard of care may be. So I think I will let Dr. Joe explain the Empower program and what we are doing under that umbrella. But as a patient, we really need to dedicate ourselves to ourselves.
I completely agree. One of the things about the clinical trial, and you said it's about the person at the time frame, is that, without when we talk about the clinical trial and the importance of it, we're talking on that level of precision medicine, and if you have a situation where, the Black and Brown community say, well, these drugs aren't for us. We'll never get to that space if you keep just using that same old, playbook as they eloquently say, if you got 30,000 people participating and only 1,000 or 5,000 are African American, then yeah, it's going to probably be more tailored to that situation. But that's not the other folks' fault. And so we do have to participate in precision medicine. So I'll let you follow up with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, beautifully described, of course, by Yelak. And I think logistically, this means, public education, breaking the myths and the stigma. I mean, as I said before, you say the word clinical trial, it means a lot of things to different people. People think that they become a guinea pig and they get put in this maze and the door behind them immediately locks and they don't know where they are. I mean, this is part of routine medical care. We've been working very hard in something called DCTs, or decentralized clinical trials, where it's not just at the big academic centers, but that we can provide this kind of care out in the community, because that's where people live, and that's what we need to provide to them. We need tools for people to find clinical trials. Just today, we launched at the IMF this Spark Cures a collaboration where on our website, anybody can go on and do a very sophisticated search, even anonymously if they want, of how to find a clinical trial in multiple myeloma across the whole country or even in their region. So we have to bring it to the people and not make it that they've got to go and wait in a big line or make an appointment at a big academic center in 3 months from now when it's going to be irrelevant. And so I think that logistical democratization of clinical trials, if I can use that word, I'm not running for office, brother.
Hold on, wait a minute. Before you do that, because my listeners might break that word down in layman's terms.
Yeah. What it means is bring it to the people.
All right, there you go.
Right?
There you go.
Bring clinical trials to people instead of making people go to some very challenging place to find a clinical trial.
Right.
And we want to bring it to the people. And by having people share their experience through our Empower program as we go community to community across the country, having people understand the disparity in myeloma and ways in which we can overcome it. We want to give that general education as well about what clinical trials are. That's part of rebuilding that trust.
Right.
So that someone says, okay, I'm comfortable enough to even just to go to my family doc to get my routine blood work or get my routine exam. And then if they come to talk to me someday about a clinical trial, it's not that far off of a step because I've already reestablished that trust.
Man, that's fly. So go ahead.
I'll add one final item in that discussion. Not all blacks are blacks, meaning the problem that I have in the Dallas-Fort Worth area is very different than the problem that I will have in the Detroit area.
Understood. Got you. Yep.
And so the solution needs to also be tailor-made for that particular community in which we are trying to solve.
Yep.
So while the problem of not being able to participate in a clinical trial is common or unique, not unique, the solution may need to be tweaked a little bit based on where you live or where I live.
Man, listen, that's an excellent point. So gentlemen, listen, I could keep y'all here for the rest of the night and we could do this all night. But we're gonna close. So I typically on my show, I know I'm ready to throw y'all off guard. Typically on my show, I close with one last question. And so I'm gonna give it to you, Dr. Joe, first. So, in your normal everyday life, outside of Dr. Joan, when you wanna get amped up, geeked up, pumped up, maybe you're running or something, give me a hip hop song that you listen to.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's gonna be tricky, man. I'd listen to anything you would sing. I gotta lead with that. I'm sucking up to the chair here, but I gotta tell you, you'd laugh if you knew what I listen to when I run. So I actually listen to a recording of the Bible by a guy who reads it out to me. So I figured that's how I read the Bible.
Oh man, I'm not gonna laugh at that. I know
that's not exactly hip hop, but it gets me thinking while I'm running.
Okay.
And maybe it distracts me a little bit from the hills and the different things that I seem to run every day.
So if you go and get past, just what's a hip hop song that you like in general?
Oh man, you're gonna kill me now. I don't want to. I told you, anything you sing, man.
All right, I'm gonna go with that.
I will follow.
Oh, he googling.
I'm going to go look at what is hip hop. Thank you for having us.
Listen, I thank you guys for joining me.
That's awesome.
We're here at the International Myeloma Foundation Support Group Summit Annual. It's the 25th anniversary. And so, like I said, as I end all my podcasts, peace out and keep 50 guessing.